Great to see your faces again. Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Teacher Certification Training course. You can be seated. Welcome to those who are here with us at the headquarters and those who are watching online, who have been able to continue with us or who possibly are even watching for the very first time. We are going to be continuing in the Respect unit, which is unit number 4 of the intermediate series. As was mentioned in the previous class, and the previous class says, if you are watching on Facebook, of course, those books are available online. Just go to the tab that talks about the books, press the more, and you'll see all the books that we've covered so far. You won't see all of them, but just the ones that we covered so far, because we don't want anyone to jump ahead of anything as we're going to look at as we move through this unit, because it's very important that all the lessons be taken in the order that they are given. And that's something that is reiterated throughout all of the books, throughout all of the introductions and so forth, because we want the students to learn these things step by step, because it's building up to a certain point. And if anything is missed, then they're going to be missing one of the pieces to the puzzle. And I don't know how many of you have ever done a puzzle, maybe a 500 or 1,000 or 1,500 piece puzzle, and you get all the way to the end and there's just that one piece that is missing, and you don't have the complete puzzle, and it can be very frustrating. Well, in the situation in regards to character, not having that one piece that will enable you to make a decision where you can bring about a peaceful solution can be very frustrating. It can also lead you to making poor choices that can get you into situations that you will regret later on in life. All right, so if you remember, William kind of got us through to the introduction to the unit here. Make sure I just get everything set up here. Have all my visual aids all lined out. And again, we are in Unit 4. This is the Chapter 1 that we're in, Unit 4 of the Respect unit. And, he went over again the introduction and, of course, how to use the program. And this part of the book is duplicated in all of the books, okay? But it's important to kind of keep that purpose, that objective, that goal in your mind when we go through it. And that's why we essentially go back through those things when we enter into a new unit. But we're going to be picking up today on Lesson Plan 1, Page A. And we're going to be talking about respect. And this, of course, is the introduction to the unit. So if you have your book with you, we'll turn there. Lesson Plan 1, Page A. All right. And so we start here. It says, the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program is designed to teach a person how to develop a positive character. Now, if you remember some of the things that William covered in the class this past Wednesday, some of the things that a lot of the other character education programs do, or where they fail, the Peaceful Solution fills those voids, fills those gaps, because it's not just a matter of developing a character, but a positive character that, the student, as they learn these concepts, they see the benefit, they see the value in these things, and they always look for opportunities to put them into practice. And that's why we have the scenarios, the enrichment activities, and so forth to drive these things, or as it said in the book here, to solidify these concepts in the students' minds. When applied, this program can improve every aspect of life. And that's an important statement there, if you notice, when applied. When applied. The definition of the word applied, or to apply, means to put to use, especially for some practical purpose. Practical purpose, or in other words, something that you're going to practice, right? That they have a discipline of schooling where if you go through a course like when I learned electrical, for instance, we had basic electricity, right? And we learned about the basic concepts of electricity, current, voltage, resistance, wattage, and things of that nature. So we got to fundamental things that were in the book, kind of the book knowledge. And then we got to apply that knowledge, right, to what we learned in the book. Just like when you're taking a driver's course, a driver's education course, and I know when I was growing up, you had to take driver's ed if you were under 18 or something like that. And you took a driver's education course, and then you had to go and you go through all those. It was so many hours. I can't remember if it was 25 hours or 40 hours of driver's education. And you learned all the rules of the roads, all the things that you're supposed to and not supposed to do, how far you're supposed to stop, put your turn signal on before you come to an intersection and whatnot. And then that was one aspect of it. Then you had to put that information, that knowledge into practical use, which meant going out on the road, getting behind the wheel, and put those things into practice. And so this is what we have kind of a twofold thing as well in the peaceful solution. Yes, knowledge is power, but you don't get to see the benefit of that power until it's applied, right? It's like even in electrical systems, they have to apply power to a circuit in order for it to be energized and the lights to come on and the motors to turn and solenoids to open and close and so forth. So power is there, but you have to apply it to a particular situation. So this is what it's saying here in the introduction. When applied, this program can improve every aspect of life. Another definition in that word apply is to bring into action. Bring into action. So when you think about that, when I was looking at the definition, I said, when you bring something into action, you're doing it from like a first person perspective, right? You're bringing something into action or putting it to work. You're the person that's doing it. And that's the goal. We want to get the students to bring these concepts into action in their everyday life. Because as teachers, we can't go out and do everything for the student, right? We can teach, we can guide, we can correct, we can point in the right direction and so forth. But at some point, they're going to have to start to make those choices on their own, to want to put these things into practice, to want to be an example of the peaceful solution, or as we're going to go over here, to be a positive role model. They have to want to do that. And that's something that takes a lot of work, takes a lot of effort to put, to get a person to the point where they desire a particular thing, right? As parents, as teachers, we desire the best for our students. We desire the best for our children and so forth, but we can't put our desire in their heart and mind. Right? Only thing we can do is continue to teach them, continue to be an example to them, continue to set certain scenarios and so forth before them to help them to see the difference of what their choices can bring, whether positive or negative. And so, but that's the goal, to get the student to see the importance of these things and to start to bring about these concepts, bring them into action in their everyday lives, in their decision-making process, when they're interacting with their peers, when they're at home with their siblings or interacting with their parents or guardians or just out and about in society, right? And of course, remember what we're talking about here is the concept of respect. And this is not a standalone concept. This is not a standalone lesson. No, you've got to take the other three lessons that we've already learned and built up to this point. And you're going to see that when we get, kind of go through this introduction here. You've got to take all the other lessons and it brings you to the point the point where you can truly understand and see how to better put this concept of respect, this lesson of respect, into practice. Yes, it requires character. Yes, it requires acceptance. Yes, it requires self-control. And we can see, the different kind of connections going both from respect to, acceptance, and from character to respect, and from self-control to respect. We can see how they're all intertwined together, right? And when they're put together and combined, and you're able to quickly draw off of one character trait from another and put it into work in your life, then you become a person who is pretty much able to solve any problem, right? To bring a peaceful resolution to any situation, any conflict that might arise either between yourself and another person, or kind of as an advisor, a mediator between two other people. And that becomes a very, very beneficial, very handy trait to have. It also means to put into operation or effect. Okay, so continuing on here, it says, when applied, this program can improve every aspect of life. That is, the entire program as a system. Remember, this is a system, right? It's also called the building blocks to a positive character, positive moral character. Just like building blocks, you got to have, like William talked about last class, you can't build the roof first. You can't build the top of the house first and expect that house to function and be built up in a proper way. You've got to lay the foundation first. Well, in a house, it's the same thing. You have a system to building the house, and you have systems within that house: plumbing system, electrical system, right? The framing system, the roofing system, the foundation system, the HVAC system, right? You have all these different systems within the system itself, and all those things come together to make a house that's fully functional. Well, it's the same thing in the building of our character. We have a system that goes from, at least in the intermediate here of what we're talking about, character all the way up to responsibility. And then you have smaller concepts within those systems that show you how to put these things into practice in everyday life. So in this unit, respect, students will learn the importance of showing care and concern. Now, this is something that we mark, we mark this in our books, we highlight it, we outline it, because this is kind of the foundational, kind of in a nutshell, 10 words or less, when we explain to people simply what respect is, right? There's an actual another word that comes into play that we'll get into later, but simply put, they will learn the importance of showing care and concern, okay? And that's a part of the definition of respect that's taught in the Peaceful Solution. But notice here who it is for others, themselves, society, and the environment. And again, that's a concept that's covered continuously throughout all the lessons. The basic foundation of what that lesson is taught first. So you can understand, okay, well, what is respect? What are we talking about? When we say the word respect, well, what does that mean? So that's shown here kind of at the very beginning, the onset. And then you have to learn respect for yourself and respect for others, respect for the environment, respect for society, and so forth. Because these are the things that we interact with on an everyday basis, right? Unless you just kind of dug out in a hole somewhere, and never go out. But even if you never go out, you're still dealing with yourself and you're still dealing with the environment, right? So it's important that we take every aspect of the lessons here to heart, because a person can't say, well, I don't really deal with people, or I don't go anywhere, I don't go camping. It doesn't matter, right? We interact with our environment on an everyday basis, and even though we might not realize the impact that we can have on someone else on another side of the globe, we do. Our actions can actually ripple outwards and affect somebody another town away, another neighborhood away, or even an entire different country away, an entire different continent. We live in a world where disrespect has become commonplace, and I think all of us can pretty much agree that that's true. Even the people that we talk to in society who, will ask for us to come and present certain lessons in the Peaceful Solution. And again, this was, I think David mentioned it, this was one of the units of the Peaceful Solution that was kind of one of the most requested, because in it we dealt with disrespect in chapter 5, and that was something that all the teachers, all the guidance counselors, they felt that this was a big problem in their school. Why is it? Why is it that young people are coming to school disrespecting one another, disrespecting the faculty, and so forth? Bus drivers, the environment, their school. Why are they doing that? These are things that have built up over a period of time. They're not just overnight things, but they also are things that are in that child's environment. It's a part of the child's influence makeup, the value system, and so forth, which we learned all the way back in character unit. For some people, people sometimes value their possessions more than the life of a fellow human being. All right, so we have two things here. We live in a world where disrespect has become commonplace, right? It's just the old saying, boys will be boys, you know. He got beat up. Oh, Johnny got beat up. Well, that'll teach him how to be a man, teach him how to fight, put some hair on his chest, right? Well, that's how he'll learn. I mean, these are just common statements that I think most of us have heard growing up, Well, you want to get beat up? Learn how to fight better, right? That never solved anything, But it's become commonplace. In other words, it's come to the point where people expect disrespect, right? How do you know that? Because when you see something take place disrespectful in society, the first thing people do is, oh, I got to get this on television. I got to get this on camera so I can upload it to a video later. What is it? World Star? That's one of those websites that they post crazy fights and things of that nature. People are expecting and even to some degree craving for violence and disrespect to be displayed in society because it's enjoyable, right? They've come to the point where they're so desensitized to seeing people being disrespected, to seeing people get hurt. It doesn't matter if it's, children, women. That was something that you hardly ever saw, many years ago was women fighting, right? Now it's so common the women are more brutal than the guys are in their fights, right? And it's just the morality of society has gotten so low that not only are people not disgusted by these things, they actually crave seeing them, right? And then you hear it. I've seen certain videos, where people are on the subway and somebody's pushed another person or they're mouthing off at somebody. And then you got people in the background. Of course, they got their cameras up, everybody's got a camera in their hand, and they're all, ooh, ah, oh, like instigating the system. Like, wow, you're not going to go out like that, are you? And then, of course, the fight ensues and then people get hurt, thrown off the train, the police come or whatever, and then it's over. What have you gained? What does anybody gain in a situation like that? Absolutely nothing. I guess they got their dose of live entertainment for the day. Well, this is where our society is right now. And then we wonder why we have so many problems, because yes, this has become so commonplace in society where it wasn't so common before because why? Morals were actually taught. Morals were actually valued. Respect for authority, right? That was actually valued. That was taught. Respect for others. That was actually valued and taught. Even it was considered disrespectful to slap and to hit a woman, right? Even if she was beating on you and cursing at you and spitting at you and stuff like that, a man just didn't hit a woman. He might have wanted to really bad, because he was being mistreated, but he just didn't do it. Now you see videos where I was up in my old school hometown in Cleveland. This woman she got all, I don't know what the problem was, if it was something with the fare or whatever, and she, cursed out the bus driver and, he could deal with the cursing out and everything. And eventually, I guess the thing that drew the line was she spit on him. He put the bus in park and then gave her an uppercut, and then grabbed her and threw her off the bus. He just straight up gave her an uppercut, and she ate it and got back on the bus, but it's just like people, they just don't care. This is like entertainment to them anymore, and it's just, as we're learning in the Peaceful Solution, as teachers and what we try to instill in our students, there is no button, right? There is no button that can be pressed in you that will cause you to act out disrespectfully, right? Hide the button, disengage it, whatever you got to do, right? There is no line that a person should be able to cross that will get you to respond or react, however you want to call it, respond to disrespect with more disrespect. And that's something we're going to see as we move forward in the lessons. No excuse for it, right? And this is where the previous lesson on self-control comes into play, right? Because it's not just enough to know what respect is, to know how to show respect, to know how to show and have respect for ourselves. We have to put self-control into practice, all right? So, again, people sometimes value their possessions more than the life of a fellow human being. And I remember that growing up. In fact, I was going to put these in slides here, but I want to yeah, let me show you this because I think some of you, I have a couple articles here on that very thing, how people value their lives. Now, if you take a look at this, now I kept this kind of, what would I say, generational, kind of the things that I grew up seeing, as I grew up as a young man, as a teenager and so forth. Now, I would kind of forewarn you, men, if you're kind of in old school stuff, you might want to, get the tissue out so you can, kind of watch out for the slobber there. But if you take a look here, these are some of the old school things that people had a great high value for. They had their cars, they had the nice paint jobs on them, they had the big fancy gold rims on them, Kragers, Daytons, whatever it was, guys took a great deal of care and effort into making sure they had the shiniest ride on the block, and they didn't just drive by, they cruised by, right? And the trunks were bumping. There's another one here, old Cutlass there, right? Got the big wheels on it. You see that nice shiny paint job on there. There's another one, Monte Carlo. People like those things, right? And they took a lot of, they had a lot of great, I guess in society they would call it pride in their vehicle. A lot of great care that they put into it. And don't you even put a fingerprint on that thing, after they got through out there washing and waxing that thing for hours. Well, take a listen to this next article here. Scratch on car ends with one man dead. All right. And again, we're talking about people sometimes value their possessions more than the life of a fellow human being. And this says, two West Side men, one of them a 5-time felon, beat a third man to death last month in their Garfield Park neighborhood after a minor traffic collision left a scratch on the suspect's vehicle, prosecutors allege in court Wednesday. And then they give the names of the men, and it says each are charged with murder in the death of a 46-year-old man. In court on Wednesday in Cook County, the judge set the bail for one, $1 million, another for $750,000. It says, according to prosecutors, the victim was returning home in his car about 3:30 a.m. on June 17th when he drove through an alley and scraped against a car in which the other two men were riding. But he did not realize there had been an accident and continued to his home in the 600 block of the neighborhood that he was living in. Now keep in mind, because David mentioned this in his class a couple days ago, last week actually, today, that there are several different forms of disrespect. This will fall into one of the forms of unintentional, right? He didn't realize he did it. He's 3:30 in the morning, probably getting off of a shift to go to work and probably tired, didn't even realize it, right? Well, it says the men, they followed the car into the driveway, started yelling at the man, and then physically attacked him. The Cook County State Attorney's Office cited this information in court records. They beat him in the head and body, and the commotion was enough to wake the victim's parents, who were sleeping in the house. His father came out, that is, the victim's father came out, and begged them to stop beating his son. But the beating continued until he lost consciousness and the attackers drove away. Both men were arrested and positively identified by the victim's father, right? Let's see here. And so this is an instance here, where, all right, it was a car. Maybe it was one of these nice cars that were all just got it out of the shop, got it detailed, or got a new paint job, candy apple red or whatever, Landau top and all that stuff. It was an accident. He didn't even realize he scratched the car. Had he realized it, and they would have civilly, respectfully made that known to him, he probably would have offered to do something to make it right, to fix it, right? But he wasn't even given that opportunity. These guys just came out and just commenced to beating on him. And his beating actually led to, I think it was about a month later, or a couple weeks later, to his death. He came out of the coma. He was actually able to identify the two attackers. And then like a few weeks later, he slipped back into a coma and died. So that man lost his life absolutely senselessly, right? Just because of something that was done unintentionally. Okay. And even if it was intentionally, right? It's not worth taking another person's life for. Absolutely not. Let's take a look at that next one there. I think a lot of you will recognize this. Can you see that? Get it out of that little light there. You know what that is, right? Everybody knows what that is. I had me a couple of those too, and I used them on my kicks, right? You had to keep them Converses nice and clean and white, you know. That was back when white shoes were still pretty popular, right? You got a little scuff, you rub that polish on there, rub that scuff remover, and you got them suckers nice and clean, boy. You know. And heavens forbid, it was like the carnal sin if somebody stepped on your shoes, right? That was a big no-no. You know, and some of these guys were so sensitive about this growing up in school, you know, in high school, in the neighborhood, and so forth. Well, some people are extremely sensitive about this. This was in New York City. The NYPD is searching for a man who allegedly struck the back of another man's head for accidentally stepping on his shoes in Midtown. You know, struck another person because he accidentally stepped on his shoes. Now, this was a victim here was 46-year-old who was taking a walk on West 40th Street around 4:10 p.m. when he accidentally stepped on the man's shoes, police said. As the victim was crossing the street, the man approached him from behind and hit him on the back of the head with an unknown object, leaving a cut, according to New York Police Department. Was it really worth that? You know, he stepped on his shoes. He could have went to the same place I did and got him some of that scuff remover stuff, you know, and rubbed that footprint right out, whether it was white, black, brown. They got all colors nowadays, right? You know, there's nothing that's worth taking another person's life for. There's nothing that's worth responding with disrespect, whether it was intentional or unintentional, right? But people, we look at that and we go, man, that's horrible, right? And society will look at that and go, well, they need to put him in jail, lock him up, and throw away the key. But we know why people make the decisions that they make, right? These are mostly due to a lack of education. Maybe part of their environment was such that, you know, you don't take anything, any form of disrespect from anybody, right? Whether it's real, imagined, intentional, unintentional, you don't take it from anybody, right? You show everybody you're a man, okay? Well, that makes you actually less of a man when you do these types of things. So we see here, people sometimes value their possessions more than the life of a fellow human being. We witness this behavior in forms of violent acts and vulgar language on television, at the movies, and of course in video games. And in songs. And some of this stuff we covered in the previous lessons when we talked about influences, you know, but I was thinking about it because I remember growing up, I think only thing you pretty much had was like, I don't know, you had like a ColecoVision, you know, an Atari game set. We didn't have much until kind of Nintendo came on the scene in the, I don't know, 80s or 90s. I don't really remember, you know. And everybody wanted to get on board with that. And, you know, before that, you pretty much only had like a Frogger and Pac-Man, you know, as games to play. But nowadays, as we brought out in the previous classes on the video games and the influences that come out, you know, one of the more popular games, I think, and there's a lot of them. There's, you know, Call of Duty and some of these other ones. Grand Theft Auto is still very popular. Think about this, you know, when a child is playing this, and really some of the bigger demographics of game players and things like Grand Theft Auto is men, you know, men that are in their, you know, 25 to 45 years old kind of age range, you know, and these guys are serious business about these games. It's almost like they're living those games, okay? But you think about influences of video games. When in the game, you're rewarded for things like bribing cops, calling a mugger on another player, completing a gang attack, holding up a store, or stealing a vehicle from a military base. You think about the objective of the game, you actually get more points when you do these things. So it incentivizes or it rewards negative behaviors. Okay. Now remember what we talked about in those classes, how your subconscious mind, how it deals with those images that are coming in, but as a person is sitting down watching those video games. The subconscious mind doesn't differentiate the fantasy land from reality, right? And it really because if you've ever watched a person playing like a race car game or a driving game, right? You'll see them, giving it this when they're going around the corners. Now, are they going around? Is turning the the controller going to make the car turn any faster, any sharper? No, it doesn't. They're pressing buttons, right? Now, of course, they got newer stuff nowadays, probably does. But, back when I was growing up, all you had was a controller with buttons on it that you pressed. But people still, come on, So their subconscious mind is seeing this as real, right? And these images are going in, and it's creating a learned pattern of behavior. So when they're in a situation like that, what do you think is going to occur? Right? They're going to go back to their gaming experience, and like was brought out in the previous classes, the military uses video games to train soldiers on fighting, on maneuvers, and use of drones, and they have first-person shooter games and so forth. So they know that the mind is capable of being trained for real life scenarios in game scenarios. Okay. Because you're going through the exact same motions. I mean, they've done studies where they've taken athletes and musicians and had them imagine doing exercises or playing notes on the piano or a guitar or something like that. And then when they compared them to the person who actually did those things, they noted that the same muscle memory or increase in muscle mass or whatever the case might be was there for the person who just imagined doing it as the person who actually did it, right? So there's not only a psychological effect, but a physiological effect too. It affects the body. It creates a muscle memory. So eventually, if a person is used to continuously watching and engaging and playing violent games, they're going to probably respond that way eventually, potentially, right? They put that risk in their mind when something comes up that triggers that response that they would have seen or experienced in the game if that comes up in real life. Okay. Other movies that talk about now I looked at these movies because these are movies that in some way kind of showed or demonstrated, I would say, false forms of respect, right? As society, or as you'll see in different cultures like gang cultures and things of that nature. Movies like Godfather, right? Rocky 1 through, 42. I don't know how many Rockies they had out there. Gangs of New York. Juice was another one. Matrix, that we even used that in the Peaceful Solution, right? And of course, these are influences, right? But influence is in showing people or putting a thought in the person's mind of what respect is or should be. And I think even in that movie, Respect, I think that was part of what Juice meant, power and respect, right? So, but these are false concepts, as we're going to learn in the Peaceful Solution, because remember what we covered here as we just started reading this, showing care and concern to others, themselves, and the society and environment around them. So we witness this behavior in the forms of violent acts and vulgar language on television and movies, the movies, in video games, and in songs. The entertainment industry seems to promote the misconception that such disrespect is normal. They produce or promote the misconception, it's the misconception because it's not true, that such disrespect is normal. And of course, we're going to learn more about the fact that disrespect is not normal. Never was, never will be, and it should not be accepted as normal. Well, people are just going to, they're just going to talk about me like that, or they're just going to act like that, or that's just how people in this neighborhood act, or that's how people act at this time of the day and so forth. No, disrespect is not normal. And it shows here that of course, remember what the entertainment industry is, how we would classify that, and talking to our students, that falls into a part of what makes up influences, right? There's a lot that comes from the entertainment industry that plays a big part in the influence of society, especially young people. They're very, very impressionable. And a lot of these movies and songs and video games and things of that nature are put out there to impress certain things into the mind of the viewers. It was funny because I was listening to something the other day, and it was talking about a very popular app that is very, very, very big amongst young people. I think it's TikTok. And they were talking about how, of course, it surpassed, I think, Google in views and downloads and searches and so forth, but how it's kind of coming to a point, and I'll try to get the article if I remember, but it's coming to the point where so many young people are watching this. It's kind of like what they call a mass effect, like watching a particular person's videos over a period of time creates a mass effect where other people, not only relate to, but start to take on the characteristics of the person that they're watching over a period of time. And they were actually talking about a person who had Tourette syndrome, and people were presenting with Tourette syndrome. Well, when they went to the doctors were saying, hey, you don't have Tourette syndrome. Immediately it went away, and they all attribute it to every single one of those young people were subscribers to this particular person's video. Now, the person who made the video, he did have it, and he was showing his daily life and how he deals with it and the things, the tics and so forth, But it was they were so drawn into it, it created this like mass, I can't remember what the word is, but I don't want to say if it's psychosis, but everybody started thinking that they were suffering with the same thing, I guess, until they were snapped out of it by their doctor. You don't actually have it. But that's how powerful the subconscious mind is, right? From these influences that we allow to go into our minds. And this can cause us, remember, anything that can change your values, influences can change your values, has the ability to change your character, right? And your character is responsible for the decisions and the actions that we make on an everyday basis. So it says here, make it seem like this is normal and is simply a part of our changing times. I was going to read something here on that. And this article was entitled, it's just really short here. It says, what is social change and why should we care? And it says social change can be defined as the way in which human interactions, relationships, behavior patterns, and cultural norms change over time. These changes ultimately transform cultural and social intuitions or institutions, concepts, and rules, which will inevitably impact society for the long haul. And so when I looked at that, I looked at what they defined as social change. Human interactions, relationships, and behavior patterns. Well, what affects your behavior patterns? If you go back, or write for your notes at least, lesson plan 1F in the character unit. Just make sure I got the right one. Yeah. Lesson plan 1F in the character unit, and it's under procedure 5. Now, this is to the teacher. One of the things that the teacher is going to do in this lesson, or being instructed to do, is explain to students that factual knowledge and experience coupled with the values one possess aid in producing both negative and positive character traits that influence or that will influence one's behavior. Okay, so these experiences, the knowledge, the values, right, and the character traits that they lead to will influence one's behavior. So why are behavior patterns, changing over time? Well, we have to go even further back to the influences, the values, the knowledge, or what they're being educated in, right? Whether that knowledge is harmful or whether it's beneficial. Well, if it's harmful knowledge or subtly harmful knowledge, right, then it's going to eventually produce a negative character that will produce harmful behaviors. And this is where these social changes come in, and it starts to negatively impact society because now everybody in society has to deal with the negative behavior of the people that make up society. Whether it's alarm systems, well, make sure you lock your door, make sure you lock your car door. I just saw on the of the blotter, I think police blotter in Abilene, that a series of cars were broken in on the south side of Abilene, last night. Ever so often that takes place. People just, going and breaking in people's cars and stealing things. Sometimes just vandalizing the cars. People work hard. Cars are expensive nowadays. Some people have payments upwards of $1,300 and $1,400 for a car now, right? More than what some people pay for their house, and cars depreciate over time. A house appreciates, right? But regardless, people work hard. It's theirs. It's their possession. They have the right to have their belongings without fear of it being abused or vandalized and whatnot, as we learned in ownership. So we're seeing these social changes. Well, the morality and the teaching of morals or the teaching of immorality is changing the values. It's changing the character of the people, and it's changing, of course, as a result, the behavior of society as a whole. So we see these things taking place, and of course, entertainment makes it seem like it's just a totally normal thing, and that's just a sign of our changing times. Well, without appropriate role modeling, now take note of that because we're going to see that a little bit further as we move forward in this introduction here to this unit, because this is role modeling being given to the student, right? The student needs this consistent role modeling being placed before them. Simply put, a role model, when you break the word down, a role, not like a dinner roll, but a role is a character assigned or assumed. Now, this is you can look at that in regards to like the role that a character would play in a play or a movie or something like that. But it's also in life as well, right? You take the role of a leader. You take the role of a parent or of an educator, right? Or you could take the role of a bad guy, okay? It also is a socially expected behavior pattern, usually determined by an individual's status in a particular society, right? So, we expect the mayor to act in a certain way, right? As this person functions in the role of a mayor or a council person or a congressperson or a senator, someone who's in that role of a leader, a sheriff, or a constable or whatever, society expects them to behave in a particular way that would be indicative of that role, right? And sometimes a lot of shame is given when somebody's caught, who kind of holds a higher position in society. They're caught up in some type of a scandal or something like that, some bribery scheme or drugs or some prostitution ring they, got busted in or whatnot. And it's looked at as very shameful because they were expected by society, to behave in a particular pattern, okay? And then when you look at that word model, it also means a system or thing used as an example to follow or imitate. So a person, socially expected behavior pattern determined by an individual's status in a particular society, and that could be anybody, right? It doesn't just have to be a person in a position of leadership. It could be a student, right? A teacher, whatever the case might be. Everybody plays a role in society, whatever that is. But your example or that example should be one that others can follow or imitate, right? The teacher should set or role model these positive character traits in their interactions with not only their students, but everybody. Because you can't leave the classroom and go, oh, well, I taught that lesson on respect. Hey, beep, beep, pass me the beep, 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 to your coworker, and cursing them out in the break room, right? And then the students walking right by, and then, are you okay in there, teacher? I thought you just taught us about respect. Oh, yes, I was just joking with Mr. Smith over here, No, we have to do this all the time. And it's a lot of times that's when kind of the true colors come out, when a person's out of that environment of the schoolroom, of this classroom, right? Because people feel they're a little laid back. The eyes of the students aren't on them. So they can kind of like let their hair down and just kind of do whatever they want to. Well, no, as teachers of the peaceful solution, we have to live these principles 24/7. It has to become a part of us, an integral part of our very being, a part of our very character. All right. So without appropriate role modeling of what respect is and how it should be applied to every interaction, our youth then practice this disrespect displayed in entertainment and other aspects of their everyday lives. Now, I wanted to read you a couple of ideologies, and you'll see this, and some of you probably have experienced this, and I've heard this growing up and seen it or heard it or been told about it, about respect, because there's a huge misconception about respect and what it is, how it's obtained, how it's developed, and how it should or is shown. Now, you think about different societies, and we talked about societies before, right? And it's, people with shared beliefs and ideas and so forth. So it can be, a society of people within a neighborhood. It could be a small society of like a society of automotive engineers, right? Who are a collective group of people who, work towards the goal of building vehicles and so forth, or designing vehicles, or things that have to do with the automotive industry. Well, you also have smaller societies like gangs, right? And I don't profess to know, everything there is to know about gangs, except what I've, been told or learned from other people who've seen and experienced these things, right? But I just looked up some simple things online and to get kind of a perspective of how people who have been in gangs and possibly have gotten out, or maybe are still in it, how they see and display respect, or what they consider respect. And it says here, when you're in a gang, you protect each other and you fight for respect. That issue of respect, or what gang members see as disrespect, often triggers confrontations and violence between gangs. Police and criminal justice experts say it's how gang members prove they belong to a gang. And I remember growing up, I had a couple of associates that I grew up with, and a part of their initiation into a gang, and there were several different ways that they could be initiated into it, but they had to fight into the gang. They had to be fought in, right? And if they wanted to leave out, sometimes that's how they had to leave out of it, right? If they could. But the idea of respect, right, even in that particular culture, it's very askew from what we're learning here in the Peaceful Solution, because the very first thing we just mentioned here is showing care and concern, right, for others, right, not just others in your gang, right, or in your society, but all people, right, because we talk about society, themselves, and the environment. That's a gang. In the military respect. Military respect is something every soldier hopes to gain. Military respect is something every soldier hopes to gain. We all know the age-old saying, to treat others how you want to be treated. Now, this starts with showing respect. Sounds pretty great so far. In the military, in everyday normal civilian life, respect is about more than just how you treat a soldier or individual. It is also how you speak to them and the tone in which you speak to them. Okay, so we talked a little bit about communication, self-control in our communication, and tone of voice, and facial expressions, and gestures, hand gestures, and things of that nature, body language. Respect, now here's where it starts to get a little bit twisted here. Respect is not given, It is earned over time. Okay? Well, that's something we're going to learn in the peaceful solution. Everybody deserves respect. Okay? And then you'll see as we move forward why that's important. It is earned over time and through your actions. Well, really, what's earned over time and through your actions is trust, right? Your reputation is earned over time and through your actions. Respect is something that should be given, and you'll see even in here, it's kind of contradictory in this. I don't know if it's a motto or a mission statement or whatever in regards to the military. It kind of contradicts itself. It says, when dealing with soldiers or civilians, your attitude and behavior will dictate the level of honor they give you. If you want respect, you begin by earning it and being respectful towards others. Well, remember, we are to treat others as we want to be treated. Irregardless of how they treat us, we should still show that respect. Well, the first thing we're going to learn about this in respect is respect for ourselves. Because when you think about the statement, treat others the way you would like to be treated, you need to know how to treat yourself first, right? You need to know you need to know what respect is and how to show respect towards yourself. It's very important. Everybody's important. And a person can't just look at everybody else and say they're important, but I'm not important, right? Because we are important. As individuals, yes, we are important. As teachers, is what you're learning here, the information that you're learning is extremely valuable, and your ability to learn, practice, and teach this to others makes you an extremely important part of society, because you actually have something beneficial to offer to others that they can take with. Teach a man to fish, and you feed him for a lifetime. Okay, so even in this, it's kind of contradictory of itself, because how are you going to respect a civilian? How are they going to earn that respect when you first meet them? Do you just treat them disrespectfully at the grocery store or at the gas station until they've earned your respect over time? You might not ever see that person again. This is why in the peaceful solution we teach about this concept about respect, being something that must be given, and all people deserve respect. And then even culturally, you think about how respect is displayed in different cultures. For instance, in Asia, people bow often. And bow often in Asia, or bowing often in Asian countries, it expresses gratitude and respect. All right. Now, in that regard, that's not anything that's harmful. It doesn't, take away from you or bring harm to someone else. In Mexico, it says women should initiate handshakes, right? Because it's not only there, but in other countries, a man doesn't just walk up and offer his hand to shake a woman's hand or to touch any woman, right? If she wants to, she will extend her hand in order for a handshake. It can be considered extremely disrespectful. It says avoid all eye contact, and keep elbows off the table. Now, I remember my mom telling me that, get your elbows off the table, especially when you're eating, and never burp. Now, in other cultures, burping shows a sign of respect, right? It shows, man, you really enjoyed that meal, okay? Some people go to great extremes and start doing the ABCs when they're burping and so forth. I don't think that's necessary, but in some cultures, don't do it. And for instance, in Jordan, people in Jordan, the country Jordan, not in Air Jordans, people in Jordan will get closer than you expect and might touch your arm or shoulder. Be quiet. Never show the bottom of your shoes. In German, it says German handshakes are firm. And of course, people in Germany should address people as Mr. and Mrs. or Herr or Frau and say please and thank you a lot. And then in Russia here, it says turning down an alcoholic drink is terribly offensive in Russia. Terribly offensive. Now, I need to stay out of Russia because I don't want to be guilty of offending anybody, by turning down a drink. I'm not an alcoholic, but I do like, beer and so forth. It says if you smile at strangers in Russia, they'll think you are insane. So they have kind of a straightforward, way of doing things in Russia, I could imagine if you're walking around like, they're probably really going to think you're insane. I'm from America. I'm going to take a drink, right? So in dealing with different cultures, and we talked about diplomats and so forth in the previous lessons, people who are diplomats, they actually learn about these customs. They learn about ways in which they can show respect and avoid disrespectful interactions with the people that they're meeting, because that's a part of diplomacy. You don't want to do anything that will intentionally show disrespect, and it's their job to be educated on that. They can't go to a country and go, oh, I didn't know I couldn't, cross, men, how we sit sometimes, and we will, put one leg over the other leg and then that'll show the bottom of your shoe. Well, in certain cultures, that's disrespectful to show the bottom of your feet. Does it do any harm for a person who goes there to just make sure that they sit with their feet on the bottom? No, it doesn't. It doesn't bring harm to ourselves, others, or the environment. So we extend that form of respect to other people if we're either in their country or either in their presence. So we see here, so those are some of the examples of respect and how it's, shown in different aspects of life. Let me see, where did I leave off here? Oh, the results. So what we're talking about here, we talked a little bit about role modeling, and with it being shown, children can learn how respect is shown and how it should be applied in every interaction. Our youth then practice this disrespect displayed in entertainment and other aspects of their everyday lives. That was without appropriate role modeling. The results, because of this disrespect and these influences from all these negative ways that disrespect is shown, the lack of appropriate role modeling, the results are homes where parents no longer have authority, right? Parents no longer have authority. Now, that doesn't mean that the parents don't have authority. What it means is that the children don't recognize the authority of the parent. The parent still has the authority of the parent in that role or that position of the parent, because if the child is doing something and they are disrespecting the parents, well, forget it, I'm going to go out and do whatever I want to, and they get caught by the police, what are they going to do? They're going to call the parents. Because why? The parent is the one responsible. They're the ones who have authority over that child. Now, in this situation, the child has lost all regards for that authority, so they show no respect. Okay, parents have no longer have authority, and schools where there is disruption in learning because of teasing, bullying, and physical or verbal assaults. And we'll get into that as we move forward, and especially when we get down the line into chapter 5 there. I want to jump ahead. But these are all forms of disrespect on many different levels, from peer to peer, or child to parent, or teacher, child to authority. And it can also be shown from authority to a child. Okay, so we want to avoid all these things. But these are some of the concepts that we're going to be talking about here as we move forward. And when we come back for next class, we're going to get into, the responsibilities that we have as teachers in presenting these lessons, but also showing the consequences that can actually take place in society when respect is not consistently practiced, when it's not role modeled by us as teachers, us as educators, whether we were in the position of a parent, a teacher, whatever position we hold, right? You don't have to necessarily hold a degree to role model an example of positive character. In everything we do, we actually teach. So we need to make sure that it's positive and in line with the concepts we're learning here in the Peaceful Solution. So we're going to pick up with that when we come back next class, which will be 12/14 at 5:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. We'll be picking up on Lesson Plan 1, Page A, kind of towards the bottom of the page. Thank you all for attending this evening, and we look forward to seeing you next class. Everyone have a wonderful day.